My name is Johanna Scott, and I'm 32 years old. If you had met me 9 years ago, back when I was 23, freshly graduated, full of duty shaped optimism, you might have mistaken me for someone who believed in things like fairness, family loyalty, and earned gratitude. I used to think that if you poured yourself into the people who raised you, if you showed up when they needed you most, the universe would eventually balance the scales. That there was safety in being the dependable one. That love, if you offered it consistently enough, would eventually be returned. I know better now. This story began long before I understood what my parents truly expected from me. Back then, my life revolved around a modest guest house behind my parents' one-story ranch home on the outskirts of Sacramento. It wasn't glamorous. The roof always needed attention, the foundation creaked when the wind blew too hard, and the plumbing hissed like an irritated animal. But the place was mine, at least that's what I let myself believe. It had its own entrance, a small kitchen, and a wide enough yard that I felt in some thin, fragile way independent. After college, my plan had been simple. Stay close while my mother recovered from surgery. Help my father with bills until things stabilize, save money, and buy a place of my own. A year, maybe two. That was the agreement I made with myself. But the problem with small sacrifices is that they never stay small. They multiply. My mother healed, but new complications arose. My younger brother Tyler entered college and immediately became the center of gravity in the household. My father, constantly exhausted from work and financial strain, leaned harder on me with every passing season. Just until we get things sorted out became an invisible chain wrapped politely around my wrists. The first link was utilities, an extra 100 here, 200 there. I barely used any compared to the main house, but I didn't complain. Then when I landed a better job as a systems analyst, my father sat me down one evening with the most carefully curated look of fatigue I'd ever seen. He held a mug of black coffee like it was a prop in a play he'd rehearsed. He told me he needed help with the property taxes. Only temporarily, he said. Just for this year. He smiled, the kind of strained smile people use when they know you're too kind to refuse. I told myself it was reasonable. I lived rent-free. I used their land. The money wasn't insignificant. Property taxes on a house that size weren't cheap. But I thought I was investing in the future. Not just the house, but our family, our stability, maybe even my eventual stake in the place. What I didn't realize then was that the only thing I was truly investing in was an illusion. My brother Tyler had always been the golden child, long before either of us understood what that term really meant. He was 5 years younger, endlessly charming, quick with excuses, quicker with apologies that never cost him anything. Growing up, whenever he forgot homework, crashed a borrowed car, or failed to pay a bill on time, my mother dismissed it with a soft sigh. "He's still learning, Johanna. You're older. You should understand." She would say it gently, as if the softness could disguise the fact that she had already chosen sides. As adults, things didn't change much. Tyler breezed through his early 20s like life was a buffet where someone else always paid the bill. Meanwhile, I worked late nights, paid taxes on a house I didn't own, made grocery store runs for my mother, mowed the lawn on Saturdays because my father's back wasn't what it used to be anymore, and reminded myself that this was what good daughters do. Responsible daughters. Daughters who don't complain. And for a long time, I didn't. I let myself believe I was building something meaningful, that my parents would remember the role I played, that Tyler would grow up and shoulder his share, that love would eventually take the shape of reciprocity. But life rarely rewards quiet devotion. The first crack in my fantasy appeared on a warm Sunday afternoon 2 years ago. I had just finished mowing both the front and back lawns, dust clinging to my calves, the sun blistering the back of my neck. My father stepped outside with 2 cold beers, handing me one, as if the gesture could erase the sweat dripping into my eyes. We sat on the porch in silence until he cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the future, about the house." I felt a quiet rise of anticipation, as though all those late nights paying bills and early mornings hauling trash were finally about to mean something. But he kept talking, oblivious to the shift in my posture. "Your brother's getting married soon. He and Nicole want to start a family, and he's really stepped up lately. Tyler had done no such thing. So your mother and I think it makes sense to add him to the deed." The air dissolved around me. I heard the words, but they felt underwater, distant, warped. "You're adding Tyler," I managed. My father nodded. "He needs stability. And you've always talked about wanting your own place eventually. He said it casually, as if he weren't rewriting my entire role in our family with a single dismissive shrug. Are you adding me too? I asked. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. His silence answered everything. That evening, after my father went back inside, I walked to the guest house, feeling like the ground beneath me had tilted. It felt like waking up after years of believing you were inside a story that belonged to you, only to realize you were just a supporting character. A week later, when I checked the county records, I saw it in black and white: Tyler Scott, co-owner. No mention of me, not even a courtesy conversation. I stared at the screen for a long time, numb at first. The sadness didn't hit me right away. Neither did anger. It was a hollow, almost clinical detachment, as if someone had stolen something out of my hands, and I was too stunned to react. That was the moment the rope snapped, the rope I'd been clutching for years, fraying strand by strand. I didn't scream or demand a conversation. I didn't march into the main house with my laptop held high, like evidence in a courtroom. I didn't say a word. I simply stopped. Stopped paying the property taxes, stopped mowing the lawn, stopped running errands, stopped being the invisible scaffolding holding up a house that was never meant for me. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was clarity, a rare, bracing kind. The kind that strips away the excuses you've clung to for years and forces you to see the truth. If they wanted to treat me like a guest, then I would stop acting like a landlord. And the silence that followed was the opening note of the unraveling none of us could stop. The strangest part about withdrawing from a role you've played your whole life is realizing how quickly people forget you ever filled it. When I stopped mowing the lawn, it didn't spark concern. Not a question, not a knock on my door, not even the subtle curiosity of a parent wondering if their daughter was doing all right. Instead, within 2 weeks, I found the gate locked for the first time in my entire life. Not broken, not jammed, just locked. Like someone thought I needed reminding that the space I occupied had boundaries now. The first morning it happened, I stood there with my work bag slung over my shoulder, car keys in my hand, staring at the metal latch. The lock wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, assertive, in a quiet, calculated way. When I walked around to the front, my mother was watering her roses, her face the picture of gentle innocence. She smiled at me, as if she hadn't orchestrated anything. "Oh, honey," she said lightly. "Tyler must have locked it by mistake. He was doing some things in the yard yesterday." I nodded, even though we both knew Tyler hadn't touched a lawn tool in years. The key word she used, mistake, felt like a performance. A small but pointed reminder this wasn't my property. My access was conditional, revocable. The next passive-aggressive message came in the form of the trash bins. Normally, I rolled mine out to the street on Wednesdays and hauled them back in after work. But now I'd return home to find the bins already dragged to the side of the main house before I ever got the chance. They didn't look neatly placed. They looked relocated, moved deliberately to signal that what I thought was my routine was now theirs to adjust. There was never a note, never a conversation, just the ever-present, wordless assertion that I was no longer part of the system that once relied on me. By the third week, the power dynamics evolved into something almost theatrical. I came outside one Sunday morning, coffee mug in hand, to find my car boxed in by Tyler's sedan. Not tightly, not enough to claim coincidence, but angled with unmistakable intention. Music blared from the open windows, an upbeat pop song that contrasted sharply with the knot forming in my stomach. I texted him, "Can you move your car? I need to leave." No response. 15 minutes passed. I walked to the main house and knocked. No answer. I circled back, weighed my options, took another sip of coffee. Finally, 25 minutes after my message, Tyler strolled into the driveway wearing sunglasses and a smug, half-smile, iced coffee in hand. "You need to get out," he asked casually, as if the situation were brand new information. I didn't respond. He moved his car lazily without apology or acknowledgement. I drove away with my jaw clenched and a silent vow settling deep inside me. I wouldn't be cast as the dramatic one. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Meanwhile, their behavior shifted in other ways. My mother started texting me with exaggerated sweetness messages engineered to sound maternal, but hollow in all the places that mattered. "Are you doing okay, sweetheart? Haven't seen you much lately. Everything all right? You know we love you. We're always here." It was astonishing how someone could adopt such a gentle tone while actively participating in your erasure. My father's strategy was more primitive avoidance. He dodged me in the hallway, slipped out back. when he heard my footsteps retreated into the garage when I approached. The man who once asked me for just one more year of help couldn't meet my eyes now. Tyler, however, thrived. Becoming co-owner had inflated him in ways I didn't think were possible. He started showing up more often, rearranging tools in the garage, griping about the outdated siding, holding long conversations in the driveway with contractors like he was auditioning for a home renovation show. He even installed a new doormat without consulting anyone, a bold charcoal gray mat that read, Scott Family Ascend, 2023. The year he was added to the deed. I nearly laughed. It was such a small, stupid detail, but it felt like a neon sign flashing, "You don't belong here." The breaking point came in late September at my mother's birthday dinner. I knew better than to expect peace, but some part of me clung to the hope that we might share a meal without the simmering hostility. She had texted me the day before, come by around 7. Just a slice of cake, nothing big. I brought a bottle of wine and a store-bought cake because I didn't know if they had one and didn't want to show up empty-handed. When my mother opened the door, she greeted me with a warm hug, and for a moment I felt a trickle of the old nostalgia. But inside, the atmosphere shifted immediately. Tyler and his fiancée, Nicole, sat at the table laughing about something on Nicole's phone. My father was telling a story I could barely hear, his posture relaxed in a way that felt performative. When I entered, they acknowledged me, the way one might acknowledge a stranger, joining a shared elevator, brief, polite, distant. I sat. My mother served dinner. Conversation stumbled along until Tyler leaned forward with a bright grin. Guess what we're doing next week? We're meeting with an interior designer. I blinked. For what? Nicole looked at me like I'd missed an obvious memo. For the house. The kitchen needs updating. We're thinking navy cabinets with gold hardware, and we're taking out the dining room wall to make it open concept. She said, "We the way a queen uses my domain." I stared at them. When were you planning to tell me this? Tyler shrugged. It's not really your concern, Johanna. You're just staying in the guest house. The words sliced. Not because they were wrong, but because they revealed exactly how he saw me, a temporary occupant, a passerby, a placeholder. I set my fork down carefully, deliberately. Tyler, you wouldn't even have a house to redesign if I hadn't paid the property taxes for the last 9 years. Nicole's eyebrows shot up. Tyler scoffed. You lived rent-free. That was the deal. There was no deal, I said quietly. I did it because Dad asked me to. My father cleared his throat, gaze fixed on his plate. No one forced you, he muttered, and the house was always going to be Tyler's. There it was, spoken aloud, without hesitation, without shame. Not ours, not the family's, not something we'd both invested in. Just his. Tyler leaned back triumphant, as if he had won something I didn't know we were competing for. I finished dinner in silence, answered small talk with polite nods, pretended my heart wasn't collapsing in on itself. After dessert, as I headed toward the door, my mother followed me. You know we love you, right? She whispered. I didn't answer, because love to me had never looked less like love. The next week, I opened my mailbox and found a final property tax warning addressed to the homeowners. Pay by October 15th or foreclosure proceedings would begin. I held the envelope for a long time, feeling the weight of every sacrifice I had justified over the years. Memories don't pay taxes. Loyalty doesn't buy a name on a deed. That same night, my Aunt Renee called. She had visited my parents and overheard Tyler bragging. He said you were just a placeholder until he and Nicole took over, she told me. And when I asked your father why they'd treat you like this, he said. Her voice faltered. He said you've always been too self-sufficient to need much. Something broke inside me. Not loudly, not dramatically, more like a quiet thread snapping. I wasn't the daughter who needed much. I was the daughter they expected to sacrifice everything. And that was the moment I understood something with startling clarity. If I was going to be erased, I would choose the terms of my disappearance and the consequences. Leaving the guest house should have felt like liberation, but instead it felt like watching a part of myself crumble brick by brick. I moved out on a rainy Tuesday morning in late October, loading the last of my boxes into my car while the sky wept harder than I could. I remember pausing at the porch, my childhood porch, the one where my mother once bandaged, scraped knees, and my father grilled burgers on summer evenings and waiting for a door to open, waiting for someone to step outside, waiting for the bare minimum, a goodbye. But the main house stayed dark, its windows blank and unblinking. No footsteps, no voices, not even a shadow shifting behind a curtain. My mother didn't call. My father didn't poke his head out. Tyler didn't bother pretending he noticed I was leaving. So I stood there with rain plastering my hair to my cheeks, clutching a cardboard box filled with mismatched dishes and the last remnants of naive hope, and realized something: they weren't saying goodbye because they didn't think I was going anywhere. People who believe they own you don't fear losing you. I drove away anyway. The apartment I landed in wasn't much. A creaky second-floor walk-up near Midtown with peeling paint and a water heater that made a choking sound every time I tried to take a shower. My upstairs neighbor had a chihuahua that barked at everything except threats, and the walls were so thin I could hear the couple next door argue about grocery lists and laundry cycles at 2 a.m. But it was mine. Mine in a way the guest house had never been. Still, freedom didn't bring joy, not immediately. That first month felt like walking through thick fog. I'd wake up tired, go to work, tired, come home, even more tired. I felt unmoored, like someone who'd spent her entire life rowing a boat for other people's benefit only to realize the oars were gone. I didn't recognize myself without the weight of obligation crushing my shoulders. Every night I replayed the past decade in my mind until the memories blurred together. Grocery runs, tax payments, lawn mowing, doctor appointments, last-minute errands. The 1,000 little ways I had maintained a home I'd never been meant to inherit. I had been the silent force holding everything together, and yet in the end, I was the one considered disposable. Even my grief felt unfamiliar. It wasn't sharp or explosive. It was slow, heavy, suffocating, like thick smoke that filled every corner of my mind. But rock bottom, I would learn, has a strange property. It forces clarity upon you. After weeks of pretending I was fine, I finally searched for a therapist. I found one whose reviews described her as direct, unsentimental, and allergic to excuses. That sounded perfect. Her name was Erin Buchanan, and from the first session, she startled me with how quickly she stripped away my defenses. I told her everything: the taxes, the deed, the dinner, the years of being the reliable daughter, the golden boy brother, the quiet dismissal. When I finished, she sat back in her chair, her expression thoughtful but unreadable. "You keep describing what you did as loyalty," she said, "but what I hear is labor." I blinked. Labor. Emotional labor. Financial labor. Physical labor. You weren't their daughter. You were their unpaid maintenance worker. She paused. And if a landlord treats a tenant poorly long enough, the tenant leaves. I laughed an unexpected burst of bitter amusement. That's accurate. Your problem, she continued, is that you thought your sacrifices secured love, but your family saw them as resources, not gifts. Her words hit like a cold wave, not cruel, just honest in a way I wasn't prepared for. We spent several sessions unpacking my guilt, my need to be useful, the way I confused tolerance with love. She pushed me to question every assumption I'd clung to. And little by little, something inside me began to shift. I started cooking again, real meals, not microwaved leftovers. I began meal prepping on Sundays, chopping vegetables and portioning stir-fry bowls with a focus I hadn't felt in months. I reorganized my closet. I deep-cleaned the apartment. I made grocery lists that didn't revolve around feeding 3 other people. It sounds small, but for the first time in years, my life revolved around me. Work changed too. Freed from the emotional drain of constant family demands, I found myself thinking more clearly, volunteering for complex projects, contributing real ideas instead of running on fumes. My manager pulled me aside one afternoon. "You've been sharper lately," she said, more confident. "Have you ever considered applying for the senior position?" I hadn't, not once, but now I did. I applied, and for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone else's permission to want more. Around this time, another interest resurfaced: real estate. I didn't mean to dive into it. It started with a video recommended to me. Something about tax liens, distressed properties, and investment opportunities. But soon I found myself devouring books, forums, and online courses. I stayed up late reading case studies about homeowners who'd lost everything because of missed tax payments. The legal frameworks fascinated me. The strategy, the opportunity. Maybe it was because it struck close to home. Maybe because it gave me a sense of control I had never felt growing up. Then came the message that changed everything. It was from Marcus Green, an old college friend I hadn't spoken to in years. He'd moved to Reno after graduation and recently inherited a duplex from his uncle, one that needed major work. He wrote, "Hey, Joe, random question. Didn't you used to be into real estate stuff? Want to help me fix this place up and split the rental profits?" I stared at the text for a long time. Then I typed, yes, a single word that would become the seed of my future. Over the next few months, I took vacation days and drove to Reno to inspect the duplex. It was a mess, peeling paint, outdated wiring. Carpet stained beyond recognition, avocado green tiles straight out of the 1970s. But the bones were solid, and for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. I coordinated contractors. I learned about permits. I helped tear down old cabinets with my own hands. The demolition dust coated my hair, my clothes, my eyelashes, but I didn't care. For once, the sweat was for me. By May, the duplex was rented out. Checks started coming in small but steady, and with them came something more valuable evidence that I could build something of my own. Back home, the situation with my parents had worsened. Not that they told me, but Aunt Renee kept me updated. Apparently, no one had paid the property taxes. My parents thought Tyler had handled it. Tyler thought my father had. Nicole assumed it was none of her business. They all waited for each other while the debt ballooned. A foreclosure notice had been posted on the door. I should have felt satisfaction, vindication, something triumphant. Instead, what I felt was something sharper, smarter, a quiet, simmering sense of possibility. Then came the email that would set the future in motion. A friend of a friend from a real estate meetup sent me a listing, pre-foreclosure property, going to auction soon unless taxes are paid. Could be a great opportunity. Address attached. I clicked and froze. It was my parents' house. For a long moment, I just sat there staring at the screen, heartbeat slow and deliberate. Then, without meaning to, I smiled. Not out of spite, out of absolute crystalline clarity. The universe had just put my past on an auction block. And for the first time in my life, I was in a position to buy it. The moment I saw my parents' address on that pre-foreclosure notice, something in me crystallized. Something sharp, resolved, and strangely calm. It wasn't glee. It wasn't vindictive joy. It was the understanding that fate had placed a key in my hands, and all I needed to do was choose which door to unlock. The first door was the high road walk away, let the county handle the foreclosure, allow the house to collapse under the weight of their neglect. The second door was the one I had never once been allowed to approach, reclaiming what I had built, what I had funded, what I had sacrificed for. I chose the second, but I didn't rush. Revenge, true, elegant revenge, is not loud. It's patient, calculated, precise. I started with research. For 2 nights straight, I combed through county databases, legal documents, tax lien laws, and auction procedures. The numbers were staggering: nearly $28,000 owed in unpaid property taxes, penalties, and interest. The county had issued its final notice. If the amount was not paid within 90 days, the house would go to public auction. Because the deed now listed 3 owners, my mother, my father, and my brother Tyler, all 3 were fully liable. And if the foreclosure proceeded, all 3 would carry the scar of it on their records for years. A poetic trifecta. Next, I contacted my real estate attorney, Rachel Liu, the same brilliant mind who had helped me through the Reno duplex process. She asked for every detail, and when I finished, she leaned back in her chair with an expression somewhere between admiration and concern. "You sure you want to get involved in this?" she asked. I nodded. "I want options. I want the legal groundwork ready." She stared a moment longer, then smirked. "You're not just gathering options." I didn't deny it. Rachel walked me through the process, forming an LLC to bid anonymously, gathering proof of funds, preparing for the possibility of counterbidders, and the exact timeline of the auction. If the taxes weren't paid in time, the auction would proceed. If no one else bought it, the property would be transferred to the lien holder or the highest bidder. Clean slate. No restitution to previous owners. That meant if I won, my parents and Tyler would lose the house completely. No negotiation, no buyback, no shared ownership, nothing. The most brutal part. It wouldn't even be my doing. It would simply be the law. Still, I didn't want them blindsided silently, not because they deserved fairness, but because they deserved awareness. They needed to feel what they had created. So I planted the seeds subtly, strategically, without ever contacting them directly. I ran into our old neighbor, Mr. Hayes, at a coffee shop. He asked how I'd been. I told him I was getting into real estate, looking at distressed properties around East Sacramento. His eyebrows shot up at the mention. He was a chronic neighborhood gossip, and I knew exactly what he would do with that tidbit. 3 days later, Aunt Renee called. "Your parents are panicking," she said without preamble. "Someone told them investors are circling their house." Oh, I replied, my voice smooth. Is it that far gone? She hesitated. Joe, did you start something? I let the silence answer for me. Then came the messages. First from my mother, soft rehearsed voicemails layered with carefully measured emotion. Hi, sweetheart, we haven't talked in a while. Just wondering if we could catch up soon. Nothing urgent. Then my father 2 calls in a row, no message left, as if he couldn't decide whether to plead or demand. Then Tyler. His text read, You need to stop whatever you're doing. I responded hours later. Doing what? His reply came instantly. Don't play stupid. The auction is in a month. You think this is funny? I wrote back. I think it's fair. Nicole chimed in next. You're tearing this family apart. We needed that house. I didn't reply. Because they were mistaken. I wasn't tearing the family apart. I was watching them collapse under the weight of a foundation they had built crooked from the beginning. Weeks passed. The deadline arrived. They did not pay the taxes. And so the auction was scheduled. I attended in person, though, not as myself. Rachel had finalized the paperwork for my LLC Evergreen Haven Investments, a name deliberately bland and forgettable. I wore professional clothes, tied my hair back, and sat quietly in the courtroom-like municipal chamber where tax-defaulted properties were sold to the highest bidder. The room smelled faintly of old carpet and stale paper. A dozen bidders sat in clusters holding clipboards, murmuring to each other about comps and margin potential. None of them knew what the property meant to me. None understood that this wasn't a business opportunity, it was closure. The bidding began quickly. Opening bid at $19,500, the auctioneer announced, scanning the crowd. Several paddles shot up. 22,000, 24, 25. Rachel raised our paddle. 40,000. The room quieted. One flipper raised his hand at 42, but he hesitated. Rachel lifted our paddle again. 50,000. The room fell silent, exactly as we'd calculated. No one else could justify a higher bid for a house in such disrepair. The auctioneer's gavel struck. Sold. Evergreen Haven Investments. My breath steadied deep and controlled. I had done it. Without theatrics. Without confrontation. Without breaking a single law. The house that my family had thought too good for me was now legally mine. I visited the property the following morning. Not out of nostalgia, but to assess what I now owned. The air inside was stale, tinged with sour neglect. The living room walls were scuffed. Dust covered every surface. Piles of unopened mail sat on the counter, unpaid utility bills, contractor invoices, a mortgage refinance offer that had probably arrived too late. The house felt abandoned, not just physically, but emotionally, like a monument to denial. I walked room to room until I reached what used to be my childhood bedroom. It had been painted a generic beige. Likely Tyler's doing, but I could still see faint indentations on the wall where my bookshelves once stood. I exhaled slow, steady. This wasn't grief. It was closure. A week later, the notices went out. Certified letters from Rachel's office, informing my parents and Tyler that ownership had legally transferred, stating they no longer had any rights or access to the property, warning that trespassing would result in legal action. Tyler sent 3 furious texts. My mother sent one long email drenched in nostalgia and guilt. Nicole wrote a threatening message full of hollow legal jargon. I ignored them all, because there was nothing left to discuss. But my father, he didn't send a message. He came in person. I was trimming overgrown hedges when he parked across the street. He stepped out of the car, slowly, looking smaller than I remembered. Johanna, he said quietly. I removed one earbud. Dad. You got the house? Yes, I replied, legally. He swallowed hard. I didn't think it would actually happen. You didn't think someone would pay the taxes? He didn't answer. We stood in silence until he spoke again, softer this time. I was wrong. A pause. We should have treated you better. You carried this family. His apology landed like a leaf hitting water, soft rippling, but ultimately unable to change the depth beneath. I nodded but said nothing. Are you planning to sell it? He asked. No, I replied. I'm going to renovate it. Live here for a while. Maybe not. But the choice is mine. He looked at the ground. I'm sorry. I didn't respond. Because forgiveness is not owed, and closure is not a gift. It's something you take back. 6 months after the auction, the house was no longer recognizable, not even to me. The sagging porch had been replaced with a clean wooden deck coated in a warm walnut stain that glowed softly in the morning sun. The siding had been repainted a crisp white. The roof reshingled, the windows upgraded to double pane with a slight tint that made everything look sharper, more intentional. The front yard, once choked with knee-high weeds, had been transformed into a simple, elegant landscape of river stones, drought-friendly plants, and a stone path that curved gently toward the front door. Every nail, every brush stroke, every tile laid was a quiet correction to the years I spent maintaining a home that had never belonged to me. Now every inch of it answered to my vision, my taste, my hands. The house didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It felt like peace. The guest house, my old refuge, my old prison, got its own transformation. I modernized the interior, replaced the old appliances with energy-efficient ones, added soft lighting, pale gray paint, and a refreshed bathroom. The first tenant, a traveling nurse named Denise, moved in 2 months into renovations. She paid rent on time, baked banana bread every time she renewed her lease, and never once treated the space like anything less than a privilege. She treated me with more gratitude in 2 months than my own family had shown me in 20 years. As for the main house, I hadn't planned to live in it. Moving into a place so soaked in painful history sounded absurd at first, like choosing to sleep inside a wound. But as the renovations progressed, I found myself drawn to the house in ways I didn't expect. Each repaired doorknob, each sanded floorboard, each freshly caulked window frame felt like peeling away a layer of someone else's claim. The memories clinging to the walls loosened and drifted off like dust. By December, with the kitchen nearly complete, I realized I had stopped calling it my parents' house. It had become my house. The kitchen was my favorite part. I ripped out every trace of the remodel Tyler and Nicole had fantasized about: the navy cabinetry, the flashy gold hardware, the performative aesthetic of people who wanted a house they could brag about rather than live in. Instead, I chose warm wood tones, matte black fixtures, soft under-cabinet lighting, and a coffee nook by the front window where sunlight pooled like honey each morning. I had stood there on more than one sunrise, steaming mug in hand, just breathing. Breathing like someone who finally had space to exist. Word about the house and everything that had happened spread through the family like wildfire, though not a single one of them had the courage to come near it. Not my mother, with her carefully curated sweetness. Not my father, with his late-blooming regret. Not Tyler, who once strutted through the halls as if he had already inherited the place at 26. Aunt Renee kept me updated without me ever asking. My parents had moved into a cramped 2-bedroom rental across town. My mother tried to soften its drabness with her usual decorative pillows and floral curtains, but everyone in the family group chat could read between her lines. The house they lost wasn't just a home, it was a symbol of the hierarchy they'd built and depended on. Without it, they didn't know how to define themselves. My father took part-time work at an auto shop. Pride had cost him more than he could ever admit out loud. And Tyler, well, Tyler's unraveling was the most dramatic of all. His credit score plummeted because the foreclosure touched his name too. Nicole left him within a month. She wasn't interested in funding a life she thought she had been promised, but never actually contributed to. He moved into a dingy apartment with mismatched furniture and a parking lot full of potholes. Aunt Renee said he blamed everyone except himself, the county, the tax office, the housing market, even timing. Not once did he blame the entitlement that had been cultivated in him since childhood. Not once did he blame the years he spent coasting on the labor of others. Not once did he acknowledge what he did to me. But I didn't need his acknowledgement anymore. Because the strange thing about emotional liberation is that once you taste it, you're no longer hungry for validation from the people who starved you. My mother occasionally tried to resurrect the image of our happy family on Facebook. She posted old pictures, trips to the lake, birthday parties, Thanksgiving dinners filled with forced smiles. She tagged me in a few, before eventually noticing I never liked, never commented, never engaged. After all these years, she still didn't grasp that nostalgia is not the same as love, and that love without respect isn't love, it's performance. I didn't block her. I didn't delete her messages. I simply didn't respond. Because closure doesn't always require confrontation. Sometimes it just requires walking away and refusing to turn back. One particularly chilly February morning, I stood in the new kitchen, a soft playlist murmuring from the speaker near the counter, the smell of coffee drifting through the newly finished space. Sunlight slanted across the countertops in golden ribbons, catching the faint sheen of the wood grain. I leaned against the island warm mug, cupped between my hands, and listened to the quiet. True quiet. Not the silence of tension or dread or waiting for someone to need something from me. Not the silence that hides disappointment. Not the silence that follows betrayal. This was the silence of a life I built myself, a silence I earned. There were no footsteps upstairs, no voices calling my name, no invisible expectations tugging at my time, my money, my energy. For the first time in decades, I wasn't bracing myself for anything. I wasn't surviving. I was living. And with every slow sip of coffee, every calm breath, every gentle sunrise in the house that once symbolized everything painful about my past, I felt the same thing. A solid, grounded certainty that I had outgrown the version of myself they once depended on. A version of me who accepted crumbs. A version who mistook sacrifice for love. A version who believed earning her place required losing herself. That Johanna no longer existed. In her place stood someone who rebuilt a life from the ground up, whose foundation wasn't guilt or obligation but self-respect. Someone who knew that love without boundaries isn't love, it's erosion. Someone who finally understood that freedom isn't granted, it's taken. I placed my hand on the smooth edge of the kitchen counter, feeling its warmth beneath my palm. A faint smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. This time I whispered to the quiet room I built something for myself. And for the first time in my life, that was enough.